The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the immaculate green lawn of the Broaddus family home in Diamond Bar, California. The air, thick with the scent of jasmine and sizzling barbecue, was filled with the easy laughter of family. Snoop Dogg, born Calvin Broaddus, sat back in a plush patio chair, a picture of tranquility, his lanky frame at ease. His wife, Shante, was orchestrating the bustling family gathering, her presence a warm and steady command center. Around them, their children and grandchildren moved in a comfortable, familiar orbit. It was a scene of idyllic success, the physical manifestation of a legacy built over 3 decades of relentless work and undeniable talent. The struggles of Long Beach seemed a lifetime away, a distant echo from another man's story. Here, under the gentle California sky, there was only peace, a hard-won peace that Snoop wore like a custom-tailored suit. He watched his youngest son, Leo, who was now a man himself, teaching his own little boy how to properly hold a football, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. The day was winding down, the sky beginning to blush with the promise of sunset. The boisterous energy of the afternoon mellowed into a comfortable quietude. Leo approached his father, a thoughtful expression on his face that was unusual for such a relaxed day. He took a seat on the ottoman opposite Snoop, the setting sun glinting in his eyes. He seemed to be wrestling with a thought, a question that had been lingering beneath the surface of their perfect afternoon. For a few moments, he just sat there, observing his father. He saw the icon, the legend, the unshakable pillar of West Coast hip-hop. But he also saw his dad, a man who had navigated a life of impossible highs and what he could only imagine were terrifying lows. The contrast between the stories he'd heard of the past and the serene reality of their present was a chasm he suddenly felt compelled to understand on a deeper level. Finally, Leo leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the gentle hum of the evening. "Dad," he began, his tone serious. "We've talked about the good times, the tours, the movies. But I gotta ask, I've heard whispers and read old articles. Was there ever a day? A time when you thought, we were going to lose it all? Like everything?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the humid nightfall. Snoop's smile didn't just fade. It vanished, replaced by an expression Leo had never seen before. The easygoing, laid-back legend disappeared, and in his place was Calvin Broaddus. His eyes, usually half-closed in a relaxed haze, were suddenly wide open, fixed on a point somewhere in the distant past. He didn't answer. He just stared, the sounds of the party, the laughter, the music, all fading into an imperceptible hum. In the background of his mind, the silence that followed was profound and absolute. Shante, sensing the shift in energy, turned from the house, her own smile faltering as she saw her husband's face. The other family members began to notice, their conversations trailing off one by one. They all looked at Snoop, whose stillness had become the center of their universe. The air grew thick with unspoken memories, the weight of a past he had so carefully shielded them from. Leo immediately felt a pang of regret, a sense that he had trespassed on sacred ground. He hadn't expected this reaction. He had anticipated a story, perhaps a difficult one. But not this complete and utter shutdown. His father looked hollowed out, as if the question had been a key that unlocked a sealed room deep inside him. A room filled with ghosts Leo had never been meant to see. Shante walked over slowly and placed a gentle hand on her husband's shoulder. He didn't flinch, didn't even seem to notice. His gaze remained locked on that invisible point in time, his mind clearly 1,000,000 miles and 30 years away. She looked at her son not with anger, but with a sad, knowing look. She understood the question, and more importantly, she understood the deafening silence that now served as its answer. The vibrant energy of the family gathering had been extinguished, replaced by a tense, emotional stillness. Everyone watched Snoop, waiting for him to speak, to move, to do anything. But he remained frozen, a living statue carved from memory and pain. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the backyard into twilight, mirroring the sudden darkness that had enveloped their patriarch's spirit. Leo's simple question had inadvertently torn a hole in the fabric of their peaceful reality. He wanted to take it back, to rewind the last 5 minutes, and go back to the easy laughter and the setting sun. But it was too late. The silence was the story, and it was more powerful, more chilling, and more emotional than any words could ever be. It was clear this wasn't just a story about losing money. It was about losing something far more valuable. The vibrant tapestry of their family life, usually so full of noise and joy, was now held together by a single, silent thread of shared concern. The emotional response Leo had elicited was not what he had expected. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic tales. There was only a quiet, heart-stopping vacuum that left everyone, from his wife to his youngest grandchild, in a state of stunned, reverent silence. After what felt like an eternity, Snoop Dogg finally blinked. It was a slow, deliberate motion, like a man waking from a long and troubled dream. He drew in a deep, shaky breath, the first sign of his return to the present. He turned his head, first looking at Shante, his eyes conveying a whole conversation of shared history in a single glance. Her hand on his shoulder was his anchor, the constant that had held him steady through the storm he was now revisiting. He then turned his gaze to Leo, and the hardness in his eyes softened, replaced by a profound weariness. "Yeah, son," he said, his voice raspy, barely a whisper. "There was a time when the whole damn world felt like it was made of quicksand, and we were sinking fast." He gestured for Leo to stay seated, a silent command that this would not be a short answer. The rest of the family instinctively gave them space, creating a silent, respectful circle around them. "You see this?" Snoop said, motioning with his hands to the sprawling house, the manicured gardens, the luxury cars peeking out of the garage. "This ain't the whole story. This is the last chapter of a book you ain't never read. To understand, you gotta go back, not just a little bit, all the way back. Back to Long Beach, 1993. The name of the city hung in the air. No longer just a place, but a dateline for a war. He began to speak, his voice gaining a little more strength, but still laced with the gravel of a difficult memory. He wasn't talking about the doggy-style album cover or the glory of gin and juice videos. He was painting a different picture of Long Beach, one that the MTV cameras never showed. He spoke of the tension on the streets, the constant low-grade hum of danger that was the soundtrack to their daily lives, even as his star was rising. "We were young," he said, looking at Shante. "So damn young. We had Corday, just a baby. And I was blowing up. Deep cover had hit. Nothing but a G-thang was everywhere. It felt like we were on a rocket ship, but in the neighborhood the rocket ship don't matter. The old beefs, the politics, they don't just disappear 'cause you on the radio. They get bigger. The spotlight on you is also a target." He described the duality of his life back then. One day he would be in a state-of-the-art recording studio with Dr. Dre, creating music that would define a generation. The next, he would be back in his neighborhood, navigating the complex social codes and ever-present threats that had been part of his reality since he was a child. He was living in two worlds, and the border between them was becoming increasingly blurred and dangerous. "The money was coming in, yeah," Snoop continued, "but it was going out just as fast. Lawyers, security, trying to keep my people safe. Trying to keep myself safe. Every time the phone rang, your mother and I would jump. Was it a DJ saying the song was #1? Or was it a call from back home telling us someone was in trouble? Every knock on the door was a coin flip between opportunity and disaster." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his face etched with the memory of that constant anxiety. "Losing everything ain't always about your bank account hitting zero," he explained, his eyes locking with Leo's. "It's about losing your peace. It's about losing your sense of safety. It's when you look at your beautiful wife and your new baby, and the only thing you can think about is that the world you come from might just swallow you all whole." The glamour of his meteoric rise was stripped away with every word. He painted a picture of fear and paranoia. He talked about moving Shante and the baby to a new house, hoping for a sliver of normalcy, but feeling like trouble was a shadow he couldn't shake. He was Snoop Dogg to the world, but to the darker elements of his past, he was still Calvin Broadus from 21st and Lewis, an accessible target. He explained how the very success that was supposed to be his family's ticket out became a magnet for chaos. Old friends became hands reaching for a handout. Old rivals saw his fame as a reason to escalate their aggression. The lines blurred between who was a friend and who was a potential threat. Trust became a currency more valuable and far rarer than the dollar bills pouring in from his record sales. "I was a kid from Long Beach, man," Snoop said, a hint of his old swagger returning, but tinged with sorrow. "I was built for the hustle, for the struggle. But I wasn't built for the fear of seeing it all crash down on my family." That was a different kind of pressure. It wasn't about surviving on the streets anymore. It was about surviving success. And that, in a lot of ways, was a whole lot harder. The backyard in Diamond Bar was completely dark now, illuminated only by the soft glow of the patio lights. The silence from the family was one of rapt attention and newfound understanding. They weren't just listening to a story, they were witnessing a confession, a peeling back of layers of a man they thought they knew. Leo felt a lump in his throat, realizing that the foundation of their perfect life was built directly on top of a volcano of fear and uncertainty. The real story was just beginning. Snoop paused, gathering his thoughts as if the act of summoning. The next part of the memory required immense physical effort. "And then came the storm," he said, his voice dropping low. "August 25th, 1993. A day that changed everything. The day the world stopped seeing me as a rapper and started seeing me as a murderer." The word hung in the air, stark and brutal. A complete stranger in their peaceful, loving home. He began to recount the events of that fateful day, not as the sensationalized headlines had, but from the terrifying, chaotic perspective of the man at the center of it all. He spoke of a confrontation, an argument in a park in Palms, Los Angeles. He described the tense atmosphere, the escalation of words, the feeling of a situation spiraling out of control with terrifying speed. He wasn't making excuses. He was painting a scene of chaos, fear, and split-second decisions. "My bodyguard, McKinley Lee, he was there," Snoop explained, his voice steady but strained. "Things got heated. It was us against them. You gotta understand the mindset. You don't back down, you can't. Not where we came from. But nobody wanted what happened to happen." He described the terrible moment a shot was fired, the ensuing panic, the world suddenly shifting into a surreal, slow-motion nightmare. He wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. But in that moment, he knew his life was over, as he knew it. The news broke like a sonic boom. Snoop Dogg wanted for murder. The headlines were relentless, the reports immediate and damning. He described the feeling of being hunted, not by rivals on the street, but by the entire apparatus of the law and the ravenous machine of the media. He was at the MTV Video Music Awards, on the verge of presenting an award, when he knew he had to turn himself in. A moment of ultimate triumph twisted into one of public humiliation and terror. The weight of the world was on their shoulders. If you've ever felt like everything was on the line, let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if you're finding this story as powerful as we are. Now, let's see how they weathered the storm. He looked at Shantae, and for the first time, her composure seemed to crack. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as he recounted the moment he had to leave her and his son to surrender to the police. "That was the first time I felt it," he said to Leo. "The feeling of losing everything. Not the house, not the cars. I was about to lose my freedom, my future. I was about to lose you and your brother. I was about to lose my life, sitting in a cell for a crime I didn't commit." The world turned on him overnight. The media portrayed him as the living embodiment of the violent gangster rap persona he crafted in his music. They didn't see Calvin Broadus, the young father. They saw a caricature, a villain to be locked away. He described the cold, stark reality of the courtroom, the feeling of 1,000 eyes judging him, the prosecution laying out a narrative that twisted his lyrics into a confession and his life into a crime spree. "My career? It was over," Snoop stated matter-of-factly. "Gone." Doggy Style had just dropped, the most anticipated album of the year, and its creator was sitting in a courtroom fighting for his life. Radio stations started dropping my songs. Endorsement deals vanished. People who were my friends a week before wouldn't take my calls. The rocket ship wasn't just sinking, it was on fire and in a nosedive. He talked about the financial drain, a hemorrhaging of cash that dwarfed anything he had earned. The legal fees were astronomical, a mountain of debt that grew every single day. They had to pour every cent they had, and millions they didn't, into the defense. The dream house they had bought became a source of stress, its mortgage a constant reminder of the fortune they were burning through just to keep him out of a cage. The emotional toll was even worse. He described the look of fear in his mother's eyes, the strain on Shante as she tried to hold everything together, shielding their infant son from the toxic storm engulfing their family. He was trapped in a legal nightmare, but his family was trapped with him, living every moment of the trial, every headline, every whispered rumor, as if it were their own sentence being decided. Every morning, I'd put on a suit, and it felt like a costume, he recalled. I'd walk into that courtroom and have to be stoic, calm, confident. But inside, I was terrified. I was a 22-year-old kid, and my whole life was being decided by 12 people who probably thought I was the devil himself. I'd look at the jury, and I'd try to see a glimmer of hope. But mostly, I just saw suspicion. He wasn't just fighting a murder charge. He was fighting an image, a prejudice against his art form, his culture, and his race. The prosecution used his lyrics against him, presenting his artistic expressions as a literal diary of a hardened criminal. He felt his identity being stolen and twisted into a weapon to be used against him, and he was powerless to stop it. That was the heart of the loss, he explained. The loss of control, the loss of his own story. They were trying to take my life from me, not just by locking me up, but by rewriting who I was, he said, his voice filled with the cold echo of that long-ago battle. And for a long time, sitting in that courtroom day after day, I really believed they were going to win. As the grim details of the trial settled over the silent family, Snoop's focus shifted. His gaze softened as he looked at Shante, who had moved to sit on the arm of his chair, her hand never leaving his shoulder. "But here's the thing about sinking," he said, his voice finding a new tone of strength. "You find out real quick who's willing to drown with you. You find out who your real anchor is, and I had the best damn anchor in the world." He told Leo that while the world saw a gangster rapper on trial, Shante saw her husband and the father of her child. When friends vanished and the industry turned its back, she became a fortress. She managed the household, she handled the lawyers when he was too overwhelmed, and most importantly, she fiercely protected the sanctity of their family life from poison seeping in from the outside world. "This woman right here," Snoop said, patting her hand. "She came to court every single day, dressed to the nines, head held high. She wasn't just there to support me, she was there to send a message. To the jury, to the judge, to the whole world. A message that we were a family, that I was a human being, a father, a husband." Her presence in that front row was more powerful than anything my high-priced lawyers could say. He described the quiet moments they had, away from the cameras and the legal team, the nights when he would come home, the weight of the day's proceedings crushing him, and she would be there, not with judgment or fear, but with unwavering belief in his innocence. She was the one who reminded him to eat, to sleep, the one who would hold him and let him be vulnerable when he couldn't show weakness to anyone else. His narrative then expanded beyond just Shante. He spoke of his mother, Beverly Tate, a devout churchgoer whose faith became a spiritual shield for the family. He recounted how she organized prayer circles, how her quiet strength was a source of immense comfort. She never once doubted his innocence, her conviction a powerful counterforce to the prosecution's damning narrative. Her support wasn't loud or public, but it was a deep, unshakable foundation. He also spoke of the friends who stayed, the small, loyal circle that didn't run when things got ugly. He mentioned his legal team, led by the charismatic Johnny Cochran, who, despite his high profile, genuinely connected with Snoop and believed in the case. Cochran wasn't just a lawyer. He became a mentor, teaching Snoop how to navigate the treacherous waters of the legal system and the court of public opinion. "Johnny taught me something important," Snoop recalled. He said, "They're not just prosecuting you, they're prosecuting a persona. We have to show them the person." He pushed me to be myself, to let the jury see the real Calvin Broadus. He understood that our best defense was the truth, not just the facts of the case, but the truth of who I was as a man. This chapter of the story was about the human connections that refused to break under pressure. He described how his true, Friends would show up, not for the cameras, but just to sit with him, to play video games, to try and give him a few hours of normalcy in a life that was anything but. These small acts of loyalty were lifelines in an ocean of betrayal and condemnation. They were reminders that he was still him, not just the monster on the evening news. He explained to Leo that this was the most important lesson he learned during that time. "Fame gives you a posse," he said, making eye contact with his son. "Trouble gives you a family. The money, the cars, the platinum plaques, they mean nothing when your freedom is on the line. What matters is the people who will stand in the fire with you. Your mother, your grandmother, your true brothers, they were my everything when I had nothing else to hold on to." The story of the trial transformed from a tale of personal disaster into a testament to the power of a support system. It was no longer just about Snoop's struggle, but about the collective strength of the Broaddus family and their loyal few. He was the one on trial, but they were all fighting the battle alongside him, each in their own way. Shante finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "We never had a doubt," she said, looking at Leo. "Not for a second. We knew the man he was. The world didn't, but we did, and our only job was to make sure he didn't forget it either." Her words added a powerful layer of confirmation to his story, the two of them a united front then and now. Snoop nodded, a grateful smile returning to his face for the first time. "See? An anchor," he repeated softly. "When the hurricane is raging, you don't need a bigger boat. You just need an anchor that holds, that support, that belief. That was the only thing that kept my head above water. Without it, I would have been lost. We would have lost everything, for real." The narrative moved towards its climax. The day of the verdict. Snoop painted a vivid picture of the courtroom on February 20th, 1996, after a trial that had dragged on for years, dominating his 20s. The air was thick with tension, a suffocating silence that was louder than any track he had ever produced. He described looking at the jury, their faces unreadable as they filed back into the room. "My heart was pounding so loud, I'm sure the whole courtroom could hear it," he recounted. "I looked over at your mom, and she just gave me this little nod. Like, whatever happens, we're ready. But we weren't. Nothing can prepare you for that moment. Your whole life, your future, everything you've ever worked for, is in the hands of 12 strangers who are about to say one of two words." He detailed the agonizingly long seconds as the foreman handed the verdict to the clerk. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie about someone else's life. He remembered the prosecution team looking confident, the reporters leaning forward in their seats, pens poised. He had prepared himself for the worst, picturing the moment he would be led away in handcuffs, his life as a free man over. Then, the clerk read the words. "On the charge of murder, we the jury find the defendant, Calvin Broaddus, not guilty." A wave of gasps and whispers swept through the courtroom. Snoop said he didn't even react at first. The words didn't register. He just stared straight ahead, his mind numb. It was Johnny Cochran's hand grabbing his arm, shaking it, that brought him back to reality. "We did it, Snoop," Cochran had whispered. "We did it." The second charge, voluntary manslaughter, also came back not guilty. The relief was not an explosion of joy, but a slow, tidal wave of emotion that washed over him, so immense it was almost paralyzing. He described hugging Cochran, turning to see his mother weeping with joy and finally meeting Shantae's eyes. Her tears were silent, her relief so profound it needed no sound. They had survived. But the story didn't end with the triumphant walk out of the courthouse. "We won the case," Snoop said, his tone turning somber again. "But we didn't walk away unscathed. The cost, the true cost of that war was something we'd be paying for years." He explained that while he was free, the family was financially devastated. They were millions of dollars in debt to lawyers, a hole so deep it seemed impossible to climb out of. "We had the big house, but we were broke," he stated plainly. The record sales from Doggy Style were long gone, eaten up by the legal battle. We had to start over, not from scratch, but from a deep, dark hole. For a while, every check that came in went straight to the lawyers. We were living on a tightrope, trying to rebuild a fortune that had been sacrificed for my freedom. Beyond the financial ruin, there was a deeper cost: the loss of innocence. The paranoia lingered for years. He described flinching at the sound of sirens, feeling a constant sense of being watched, and struggling to trust people outside his immediate circle. The trial had fundamentally rewired his brain, leaving him with scars that no not guilty verdict could ever truly heal. "That's what I really lost," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I lost that carefree kid from Long Beach forever. I lost the ability to to walk around without looking over my shoulder. They took my privacy, they twisted my art, and they put my family through hell. We won, but damn, the fight took a piece of us that we could never get back." He told Leo that this was the lesson he wanted him to understand. "This life we have now," he said, gesturing to the peaceful backyard, "it wasn't just built on hit records. It was built on the ashes of that fire. It was built on your mother's strength, on our resilience, and on the hard lesson that everything you have can be taken away in a heartbeat. Not just the money, but your name, your freedom, your peace of mind." He explained that the experience, as horrific as it was, ultimately made him the man he became. It forced him to be smarter about business, to cherish his family above all else, and to understand the profound responsibility that came with his platform. It taught him the difference between the fleeting highs of fame and the enduring value of loyalty and love. The fire had forged him into something stronger. The victory in the courtroom was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a long, arduous journey of rebuilding. Rebuilding their finances, rebuilding their sense of security, and rebuilding their lives. The emotional and financial debris of the storm took years to clear. A quiet, private struggle that happened long after the media had moved on to the next scandal. The patio was now completely dark, the only light coming from the soft, warm glow of the house behind them. The story was finished. Snoop leaned back in his chair, the telling of it having clearly taken a toll. He looked drained, but also lighter, as if unburdening himself of the memory had lifted a weight he had carried alone. For decades, the silence that had initially been born of shock was now one of deep contemplative respect. Leo stared at his father, his mind reeling. The man he had known his whole life as a calm, almost untouchable icon, was suddenly recast as a survivor. He saw the faint lines of worry around his father's eyes, not as signs of age, but as faint scars from a war he never knew his father had fought. The lazy, relaxed demeanor he had always associated with his dad was not a sign of indifference, but of a hard-won peace. He finally understood. The silence, the initial frozen expression on his father's face, was the echo of that courtroom, the memory of that fear, the ghost of the man who thought he was about to lose everything. It wasn't just a story about a legal battle. It was the origin story of their family's strength. It was the reason his parents' bond was so unbreakable, the reason his father valued loyalty and peace above all the trappings of fame. Shantae looked at her son, seeing the understanding dawn on his face. She gave a small, sad smile. "Your father protected you all from that," she said softly. "It was his mission to make sure the only world you knew was this one. The one where you were safe. The one where you didn't have to feel that fear. He carried that weight so you wouldn't have to." Leo felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, awe, and an overwhelming love for his parents. He looked at his father, the legend, Snoop Dogg, and saw him more clearly than ever before. He saw Calvin Broadus, the young man who faced down the abyss, and clawed his way back, not just for himself, but for the family he refused to let go of. He was no longer just a successful rapper, he was a testament to resilience. "Dad, Leo started, but his voice choked up. Words felt inadequate. He simply stood up, walked over to his father, and wrapped his arms around him in a tight hug. Snoop, surprised at first, relaxed into the embrace and hugged his son back, patting his back gently. It was a hug that said everything that words could not, a transfer of understanding and a lifetime of unspoken gratitude. The other family members, who had remained on the periphery, slowly closed the circle again. There were no words, just hands on shoulders, shared looks, and a collective sense of unity. The story of their darkest hour had, paradoxically, brought a new light to their understanding of each other. It had reforged their bonds in the crucible of a shared memory, finally brought out into the open. The question of losing everything had been answered. It wasn't about the material wealth that surrounded them now. That was just a byproduct. The real wealth was in that circle. It was in Shantae's unwavering hand, in Leo's newfound respect, in the collective strength that had weathered the storm and brought them to this peaceful night. They hadn't lost everything back then because they had never lost each other. Snoop finally looked up, his eyes clear, the ghost seemingly at rest for now. He looked around at his family, a real deep smile returning to his face. "This," he said, his voice full of quiet conviction, his gesture encompassing them all. "This is everything. And this is a legacy no one can ever take from you." The silence that followed was no longer heavy or tense, but peaceful, full of love and a profound, silent understanding.